Relatives of captured Ukrainian soldiers are demanding information from Russia about their loved ones. It's after 50 prisoners of war were killed in a missile strike on a facility in the eastern Donetsk province. Ukraine and Russia have blamed each other for the attack. Well, let's stick with that story. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called Friday's shelling of that prisoner of war camp that left more than 50 people dead a deliberate Russian war crime. The strike hit the Olenivka prison. That's where Ukrainian prisoners of war were being detained. It comes after Russia and Ukraine signed a landmark deal last week, allowing grain exports to resume from Black Sea ports. That's after they were blockaded by Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces. There's a lot for us to unpick there, and luckily joining me now is Michael Bociurkiw. He is Global Affairs Analyst and Atlantic Council Senior Fellow. Michael, good evening to you. Let's start, if we can, with what has happened with that prison. There are calls for the Red Cross and the UN to investigate the many people who died in that prison camp of Ukrainian prisoners of war. What do you understand to have happened?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely horrific. This just emphasizes, again, Ukraine's position right now as the biggest open crime scene in the world. These 50 deaths added to all the other horrific crimes that have been committed by the Russian side. There seems to be almost no end to it. We understand that the Russian-backed rebels, rather, have not given access to the ICRC or to the United Nations, but I don't expect them to. You know, I've sat across from the savages when MH17 came down as part of the OSCE team. We've sat across from them many other times, and there's not much humanity there to be seen in their eyes. So I don't expect them to answer calls from the international community, including the British ambassador to Ukraine, to allow an investigation to take place.
Many of those that were in there and the relatives are waiting to hear whether or not they've survived or not were those of the Azov battalion, that big standoff, that last stronghold, wasn't it, in Mariupol. And when you see tweets like was put on Twitter by the Russian Embassy UK saying that those soldiers deserve execution, it does make you wonder about the motives.
Yeah, it sends a chill down your back. You know, it just, again, shows that Russia cannot be treated as an equally standing member of the international community. And I think it's time for Western leaders to realize that and to, you know, stop inviting them to international fora. Having said that, I think it is a good thing that the leader of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, is still engaging with the Russians, because that could influence them to open up investigations like this. And you mentioned the grain at the top as well, and get that flowing. But look, the Azov Battalion is a group which Mr. Putin has very openly voiced his hatred towards. They have, however, been integrated a long time ago into the Ukrainian armed forces, so they're not some rogue group. And Ukraine, as far as we all know, has been abiding very closely to the Geneva Conventions and other rules, which the Russians are not.
Russia is saying that it's Ukraine that has actually hit this prison, and it is situated quite close to the war front, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a typical Russian response. That is part of their playbook to blame others. You recall also in 2014, they blamed Ukraine or other parties for bringing down MH17, in which 298 people died. So it doesn't surprise me, but the Ukrainians have made it clear to everybody that they did not do that, that they're not into the business of killing innocent civilians.
There have been quite a lot of international organisations going to look at what has happened in some of these dreadful battles and dreadful atrocities. Do you think that anybody will ever face justice for war crimes committed in Ukraine?
I think so. Over the years, Ukraine has developed a lot of expertise in terms of gathering evidence. It's trained a lot of experts in terms of, appearing in these international fora and arguing their cases. So there's a lot of players on the ground here. I understand that they need to communicate more with each other, but we're in a different era right now with geolocation and with organizations like Bellingcat who are able to reuse real incredible forensics, that open source material, citizen journalism material to put cases together. It really helps cases like this. So yes, there's already one Russian soldier who has been sentenced. There, I understand, about 20 more. And I think in terms of number of cases of war crimes, I mean, we're into the thousands right now. Hence, I am calling it the biggest open crime scene in the world. There's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, there are even reports flying around, I don't know about the veracity of them, that thermobaric weapons were used on that prison. Is that something that could be established?
I'm not so sure, but we do know that these weapons exist. We do know that these weapons have been used in other places, theaters of war, with devastating consequences, such as Chechnya. And another big fear, Sam, is that Russia will resort to, also in desperation, also resort to using chemical weapons, biological weapons. A big fear, I mean, I'm in Odessa right now, it's not that far from Zaporizhia, is the Russians at the moment have control of a major nuclear power plant in which they park their own vehicles, ammunition, and they're forcing the experts there to answer to Russian command. That is a very, very chilling scenario if something goes wrong there. It will affect not only Ukraine, all of Europe, possibly the world. So we pray that they don't make a wrong move there, obviously.
That doesn't bear thinking about, does it? As you say, you're in Odessa. Talk us through the situation. This deal was brokered to get last year's stock of grain out on the water to the rest of the world. What progress has there been in getting it to actually move?
Well, this is a rare beacon of hope, if we can put it that way, Sam. We have, according to Ukrainian President's office figures, 17 vessels out there, including a Turkish flag ship loaded yesterday. And in total, that represents about 580,000 tons of grain. So that's a lot, considering that there's about 20 million tons locked up here at the moment. Now, the Ukrainians say they're ready to go. The vessels are in place. A lot of them were actually loaded during the war, but they're waiting for the green light from the coordination center that was established in Istanbul. The Russians, in the meantime, have said Ukraine has not met all of its commitments yet, so clearance isn't there. As you may have heard, the G7 ambassadors were also here yesterday. I don't know if they were here to supervise or for a photo op, but hopefully their presence here, and also of Mr. Zelensky too, will influence things to move forward quicker. One more quick thing. I mean, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, and Mr. Erdogan have a lot of skin in the game on this. Their reputations are on the line. So I think they're really going to leverage their influence to make that food happen. A lot of millions of lives are on the line right now because of that locked up grain.
Of course, and it does rely on bilateral trust, doesn't it, between Russia and Ukraine? But there are also operational complications because it's not necessarily safe passage for ships at the moment.
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of mines in those waters. In fact, so many, they sometimes break loose and float up onto the beaches around here. Hence, the beaches are empty. But the parties will have to rely on reliable mapping from the Ukrainian side, the Russian side. And then also there's a question whether insurance companies will have the wherewithal to insure these ships to make them go through. So there's a lot of moving bits in place that makes it a very complicated arrangement. But I think everyone realizes that many millions of lives are on the line. And also Russia realizes, or should realize, that many of his allies, Egypt and countries in Africa, are having a very difficult time. People are starving because there's not enough grain flowing.
Yeah, so Michael, just final question to you. Best case scenario, when do you think world supplies could start to approach normal again?
I think actually, if everything moves, say tomorrow or the day after, we could see an impact already in days, because already when this agreement was announced, world wheat prices did start to fall. So, but it can't move soon enough. I mean, it's been locked up for 5 months now, and Ukraine obviously is one of the biggest exporters of grain, also sunflower oil, which is lacking on European shelves right now. So, we're really hoping for the best, that it moves quickly.
All right, fascinating talking to you to get your perspective from on the ground there in Odessa. Michael Bociurkiw, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.